It's the radio guy, Mike Prince. Welcome to another episode of the Mike Prince Show. Of course, our daily mission is to bring you news that you can use. Today is not going to be an exception to the rule. We have caught up with an old time friend. He is at William and Mary right now, but we're going to get caught up on all of that and much more to dive into on today's episode as I present to some and introduce to others the head football coach for William and Mary, none other than Mike London. How you doing today, my man?
Thanks for having me on, Mike. I'm doing well. Hope you're doing well. Your listening audience doing well, but it's good to be with you again.
Well, man, it's good to have you back. And I guess before we get started, man, what you been up to, man, with all this COVID life issues going on?
I tell you, it has been it's been challenging, as we all know. We're living in unprecedented times now, and faith having to be a major component of how we get along from a daily interaction with with our family, with people that we normally have contact with now. The Zoom is now the next new thing that's happening now, and you try to uplift your community, you try to stay positive, knowing that this too shall pass, but at the same time you recognize that empathy is needed, all around, and just hope that people can get through this pandemic as it's besieged this country, this world, and you hope that you can bring a measure of hope and encouragement to others. And so that's what the days are filled of with Mike, is just dealing with the players that I'm responsible for, the coaches and their families, my own personal family and friends as well. So we're hanging in there, and we'll keep pushing forward.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about William and Mary in just a moment. But the last time you and I spoke, it was just before the new year. And who would have thought that the things that have taken place in 2020, that we would be where we are right now? Kobe Bryant, the pandemic. You have the Confederate flag coming down, the issues going out throughout the world of protests, this, that, and the other. And let me add this one, the restructure of the Mideastern Athletic Conference. There have been a lot of things going on, man, and we're just halfway through the year.
Well, no doubt. I mean, like I said, every week it seems like there's something new. There's some change. There's a new normals that are being created. But you're right. It's who would have thought that meeting through Zoom and having conversations and getting work done was something that was going to be done possible. And now we have student athletes or students going to their classes via Zoom. You have the meetings, whether it's corporate or athletics or whatever it may be, via Zoom. So you're right. The things that have gone on have changed significantly, and we will probably continue to keep having to adapt and change and facilitate and come up with new strategies of how we can move forward in the 21st century.
Well, when you speak about these new strategies that'll be coming up, obviously with Zoom and all the technology that's available, what are some things that you're seeing in the short future that has forever changed how you personally will conduct business, whether it's scheduling, recruiting, or preparing for games, with some of the technology that maybe you didn't lean on as much before?
Well, I mean, what's been demonstrated is when so you have training camp where you're trying to, bring the football IQ of your players up to a level that when they have a chance to compete on the field, that they'll be ready. So, we were one of the very few teams in the country that had spring practice in January, February. We were done, and so a lot of schools were affected by not having the opportunity to have spring practice in the March, April, May period. So we were able to take the film from the practices and the scrimmages and do the cut-ups. And so now when the position coach or the defensive offensive coordinator sits down or has a meeting via Zoom with the players, then there's cut-ups, there's teaching, and there's critique. Now you do that obviously with film, and then then you give them an idea of what some of the things they have to correct, and then based on what they saw, then they will have to go out themselves and make those corrections, as opposed to a coach being there. And the whole hands-on approach to that is dramatically different, because when coaches can be around and coach and teach, then you rely on the player to get better from that standpoint. Now we'll have to rely on the fact that through the video that's shown, and like I said, some schools weren't able to have a library of updated film on terms of what they're doing with the new schemes and systems. So you're hoping now that as the phase part of coming into these July camps, and that varies from school to school, from conference to conference. You're seeing the guys are coming in, and then guys are testing positive. And I would say this, Mike, probably the biggest issue is, obviously everybody wants to mitigate cost and the complexity that's going on. And we all want risk assessment. The issue is when a young man comes to, say you come to the stadium or you come to the office, we're going to have, testing and best practices. We're going to do those type of things, take a temperature, test them. The issue is when they leave your facility, because you have your doctors and your medical staff, your trainers, they're all there doing, what's best practices. When the kids leave, they go back to their apartments, they go back to being just a regular person, then they interact with other people, then part of the process of the issue becomes they get infected by somebody who wasn't involved in the process and procedure when they were coming onto your campus. So you see that nationally going on, the different programs, Clemson, Alabama, all over. And if we don't get a handle on that, or how we're going to handle once they come to your campuses, okay, we'll test them, okay, we'll monitor them, we'll take a temperature, but then once they leave, making sure that they understand that that group of people that you're surrounded by must be selective. It must be, inclusive to just those who are coming to practice. So there's a lot of things that are going on that have to be done in order for us to safely continue on.
We're speaking right now with Mike London, head football coach at William and Mary. And Mike, you just said something that I think the young mind has a hard time getting a grasp of, and that is, you said when they go back to their homes, abodes, and they're normal students. But in all fairness and all actuality, and this is where some people will have a tendency to have I won't say a X, but a slash against student athletes. They're not normal students, Mike. They are student athletes. They have certain things that they're responsible for. In fact, there's more on their table, because not only do they have to keep up grades to be eligible, they have to do with the rigors of practice. They have to do with the rigors of whatever their skill position is on that said team. So they can't be the quote unquote normal student, and they have to kind of govern themselves accordingly. And there's a responsibility, and I know it's a big responsibility, that you're putting in the hands of 18 and 23-year-olds.
Yeah, and again, I agree with the fact that, you're a student athlete that deals with so many other issues. The expectations of performing on the field, in the classroom, and in the community. You're correct when you say that, Mike. Part of this is how do you mitigate a situation where when they go back away, when they're out of your facilities, when they're away from the practice field and the meeting rooms, how do you mitigate those type of things that they're exposed to? And some of the other things that are going on is, back in the day, there used to be like athletic dorms. All athletes were there, and then the mindset became, let's infuse them with regular students. Let's just not stereotype these guys of being athletes and having their own dorms and having their own. Well, now because of you want the schedule, you want the routine, you want the daily interaction with your medical staff and doctors to be very similar. Now there's talk about having that athletic dorm or having a place where all athletes are, so at least you know where they're at, as opposed to when school starts, they're living in a dorm and they have their routine and they don't know what the regular student is doing or their activities or who they've been around, and you raise the potential increase for testing positive. So there are new normals, there are new things that have to be discussed and talked about in order to ensure primarily, number one, the safety and well-being of the student-athletes that will be competing.
Absolutely. And, of course, another um, obvious challenge is that this virus, for whatever reason, some have been medically noted, they're hitting the African American community way different than most other communities throughout the country. So when that kid goes back to their normal quote unquote home settings away from the safeties of campus, and it's so many moving parts to try to get a grasp for this thing, which is why you're seeing throughout the country on the lower tiers right now, a lot of programs are just shutting it down, waiting for the best overall solution, which in my honest opinion would be having some sort of vaccine, and that way we could get a better control of this thing rather than to play Russian roulette with some of these kids. And I know money is a moving, motivating factor for the upper tiers, professional and Power Five. But for the most part, those two sections have so much money at stake that even though there will be a trickle down effect of the money that could be lost, is it really worth going up against the unknown, what the virus has been providing, to chasing a couple of dollars?
That's and therein lies the issue. Obviously, there are some that say, well, this is a virus, and they've likened it to influenza or influenza, excuse me, and the flu and things like that. But obviously, as we know, it's much stronger, it's much more deadlier, and part of the problem is how do you continue to fund your athletic department if you don't play and you have those TV contracts, you have the sponsors, the people that put their signage in and around your stadiums, the people that donate to your program. That's very challenging, and we're living in a day and time that some schools can't handle that, can't go beyond that, and unfortunately, you may see, if you've already seen, schools cutting sports, schools putting the workforce, part of the workforce, on furloughs, and that's something that's going to be definitely challenging to what's happening in order to operate at a function that schools have been operating at. And the other thing is online classes again. Not bringing students on campus. That's another issue. I know that the country was thrust into having to do that, where professors had to get acclimated to, all right, this is the new normal now. And so now, like you said, like there's schools that are saying we're not having any fall in-person classes. We're going to go via the digital status, and the sports are gone. So it's every day, every week is something new, and as the stakeholder and caretaker of the program, I just have to make sure that we continue to keep doing the things that we would do in operating and getting ready for our first couple games. By the way, one of the issues is, you play 12 games, 8 of it being your conference opponents. Normally for an FCS program like ours, we were at Howard, we played UNLV, is their money games. And so now, because we would go play, we play Stanford our first game. If the governor of California says, you know what, California's not ready for a team coming outside, coming from the outside in, then that's our money game. And so that will have to be shifted. Things will have to change on that. So there are a lot of uncertainties, and we're all waiting, to hear again what best practices are. We see it, but we also see young men testing positive, young men and women testing positive. So we're in unprecedented times, Mike. I have no answers, and IDK, I don't know, it seems to be a popular answer.
Look, in all capital letters, I don't know, man. I'm clueless. We're talking right now with Mike London, head football coach of William and Mary. And when you made mention about, traveling to California, some states now are saying if you're coming from outside the state, there's a 14-day quarantine before you can even mingle. And I was like, who can afford to be in quarantine of 14 days if you're going to visit anywhere before you can go? So I was just thinking hypothetically, if you had a football game in California, you'd have to fly there 2-3 weeks ahead of time before you could play. And then you're talking about classroom challenges. So it's like you say, it's just problem on top of problem that keeps unraveling. It's like that yarn or that piece of thread that you pull out the suit, and the next thing you know, you had a suit.
Yeah,
You don't even have a suit anymore.
yeah. You wearing a vest now. You had a suit. Now you got a vest on a little bit. Yeah.
So hopefully this thing will get figured out. Now, you made the mention of going from Howard to William and Mary. You've had the fortune of playing professionally in the NFL. And let me ask you this, Mike. And I don't mean to put you in the hard spot, but every now and then I got to ask, a question of substance. And that question is this: with this virus, has it exposed that just maybe there has been a lot of overspending in athletics from top to bottom, a lot of fluff dollars, and they're seeing now that as they get down to the core of this stuff, that in particular salaries and certain ways of doing things are over the top?
Yeah, that's a fair question, Mike. I do know this, that the safety, health, well-being of the student athlete, and it might not be equated with how many pair of shoes he wears and the kind of gear that he wears, but it definitely needs to be equated to, um, like I said, mental health and well-being. Because here's the thing: you think about these young kids, these young girls and boys, men and women have gone home to their homes. A lot of them left their home life situations to come to a university to experience a new normal, a new life, new opportunities. So for the last 4 months, they've been back at home. So whatever they were dealing with before when they left to come to school, now they've been back at home dealing with whatever the issues they had prior to coming to your school or your university, but also having to deal with the academic components. Some of them, weren't able to go out and work out because of the restrictions on the number of people you could be around, social distancing. So, to me, I think that a large part of what's going on now, or allocated resources, should be towards the mental health and well-being. Because if we do come back to these campuses, these young people are going to bring issues and baggage with them. Not only what they had before, but coping with seeing perhaps a loved one lose their job, a loved one being lost, a friend of a friend, someone they know being lost or displaced, or things like that. They're bringing a whole another level of baggage with them. And I know we want to play sports, we want to, men and women's basketball, we want to play football, but we need to be prepared, and the appropriate funds allocated for the overall well-being of a student athlete.
That's why I like talking with you, Mike, because you speak with logic, with clarity, rationale, and sometimes coaches get lost in the business of sports rather than the camaraderie of sports. And I think that camaraderie, even though it is a business, should always override camaraderie, because with camaraderie comes the word trust. And when there is a trust factor on the positive side from both parties or all parties involved, you can go down the road. And I know there's going to be a lot of money missed, but you can make money up when you got good health and you got a strategic plan for getting out of the hole. That's been proven. But once a person is gone, there is no reset button. You can say, I'm sorry, or I didn't mean to happen that way, but there's nothing that you can really do about it. So I'm leaning more toward the safety over salary or productivity from the financial ledger book, from my vantage point.
Yeah, and I obviously you understand that it's a critical component to. We talk about getting things back to normal. It may be a long time, or if ever it gets back to the perceived normals that we've had in the past. We're now living in a new normal. We're now living in an age where adapting, having different strategies, facilitating. We're living in that kind of age, and so as you look around, you see what other schools are doing. Look at the NFL, look at the NBA, all the things they're talking about doing. and it could be very difficult in trying to start a season in less than a month when you're still seeing that the best of the best who have all the resources, who have all the funds, because there's two different deals. I mean, one is screening and one is testing. So screening is having a thermometer, when the players come to the facilities and and all those things. And then there's the testing. You test it, the results take a couple hours, a couple days, before you come back with the results. And what if somebody tests positive? Like, put it this way. Here's an example. You bring two quarterbacks, your first and second team quarterback. They come in. Some kind of way, say the first string quarterback contracts, COVID-19. Because he was rooming with the second team quarterback, that second team quarterback now has to be quarantined as well to make sure that he wasn't affected as well. So if you're putting a team together and you're starting your season or you're starting the training camps, you got quarterback 1 and 2 out. So, again, until we find out what's the best ways to go about processing the players, and that may take us into a October start, for the season. It may take us into a spring seasons, occurring. So again, we just don't know, and all of us are waiting.
Yes, we're, as they say, waiting with bated breath of what could be. And there are a lot of people that are really having a hard time trying to put their mind around no sports. Of course, we're a sport-driven program, but that's not all that we do. And we all see and appreciate the value that sports brings to the table. But man, there are a lot of other things to be dealing with and concerned about. Now, I got this question, Mike, and hopefully you can answer it for me because I really have seriously been trying to figure this out. You have 100 ball players suited up on your sideline. You have staffs and trainers and sideline people. It's always the who's who on the sideline on game day, right? How do you keep social distancing on the sideline during game day?
Yeah, now that's very interesting, and that's again, we have each team has, as you know, a group of doctors, and we particularly have one that's an infectious disease doctor who our schools relied heavily on, as well as the CDC within the state and the governor. And it's a contact sport where you're grabbing, tackling people, and you're down on the ground with them. So, as I said, as the NFL starts to introduce their training camps, and what you see on TV now, you see quarterbacks throwing, but there's no live rush coming at them. There's no, so it is going to be interesting in how we proceed with having that many individuals at the beginning, on the sideline, and when you play a game, you see offense and defense separated most of the time because you have different benches. So you may see that on the bench or the sideline at least, and we've done in the past where if the special teams guys were up there, there was a dot on the ground that said, "Hey, this is where you stand." So you might see in a setup in the stadium or where people are, particularly on the sideline, you might see the sideline spread out or players distancing themselves when you have the offense and defense on one particular side. So I'm sure there's going to be creative ways of how to do that, of how to set your team and how to get ready for the special teams on kickoff. I mean, obviously you're going to be together, or are they going to allow us to line apart prior to the whistle being blown? So that's another great point that you bring up, Mike. What would a game look like in terms of all that? Now, that's assuming that all the players that are on the sideline and personnel have been tested. If they've been tested and they don't have any symptoms or asymptomatic, then maybe them congregating together might be allowable. But again, that's another question to ponder.
Right. I was reading a report out of California, and they were recommending that players be tested. And we're talking football, of course. We're talking to a football coach. That players would be tested 3 days a week. That Wednesday prior to the Saturday game. Then they would be tested again on Saturday prior to them actually playing the game, and then that Monday at the completion of the game. And they were guesstimating at $50 per test per student athlete. You would have to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of 450, close to $500,000. Okay, I can see that in the NFL. I can see that with a Power Five. I can even see it with Group of Five programs. But FCS and anything below the D1, D2, D3, NAIA, where is the funding going to come for that? And then we're only talking about testing and still not a cure.
Another great question. I mean, obviously, not only athletics, but the universities themselves. If we're allowed to play, and it's not going to be just a decision by the athletic director. Obviously, it's going to be a decision by the school presidents and the board of visitors and all that. And so I'm quite sure that the discussion of again, I go back to the screening versus testing, and what you said is there's a possibility of that happening with the 3 tests. Can you imagine on a Saturday you test the players, and as I said, the same scenario with your first and second team quarterback, if they test positive, and you're down to your backup receiver who was a quarterback in high school, but now, hey, you're up, man, let's go. So, but again, those are things that when you test, how you test, the frequency of it, and then you're right. If you test positive, you're looking at at least 2 weeks, and maybe even more. You're looking at least maybe even 3 weeks, 2 weeks of the standard practice of self-isolation. But then you also have to get acclimated back to being ready to play. So you're right. That's a great question.
Okay. Now, a little bit more, I guess, lighthearted with this situation. It's going to have probably go back to the old 3 yards in a cloud of dust, man, once this thing gets back started, because timing and everything else is going to be off. And then I guess people are going to be afraid to tackle each other. So you might see more run games and faster game times, huh?
You're going to have to tackle. You're going to have to get close to me and bring me down. Or you may see, how you may see guys taped up from like no skin showing, just all the way, calves taped up, arms taped up, fingers taped up, everything.
You remember that movie Little Giants, and the little kid was wrapped in all the foam and stuff that his mom sent him to practice?
You're right. Yes, that's right.
Or Mike, we could probably revert to playing flag football. What about that, huh?
I'll tell you. Well, you know what? The cost of polyurethane is going to go up because mamas are like, "Hey, where the couch sofa thing stuff go? Where the pad go on that?" You go outside, you got it all wrapped around you and everything.
Oh man, goodness. we got a lot to figure out. Mike, I got to take a quick break. Can you hang around with us, man, and we'll come back and finish up? You're listening to the Mike Prince Show with head football coach Mike London from William and Mary. We'll pause for the calls, and we'll be right back. I'd like to take this time to recognize our sponsors and supporters at the Open Mic Broadcast Network: Brazos Valley Schools Credit Union, Temple of Refuge Ministries, Prairie View Athletic Club, Attorney Lee Van Richardson, Farmers Insurance of Hempstead, Texas, Diva Skin Conditioner, Helping Hands Lawn Service. Thank you for your support of our local and regional coverage of student athletics here at the Open Mic Broadcast Network.
Want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth! I have a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom. You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall.
Join us for a daily episode of the Mike Prince Show right here at the Open Mic Broadcast Network. And welcome back to the Mike Prince Show. Our special guest is Coach Mike London of William and Mary. And I forgot, Mike, not that I forgot, but I failed to mention at the beginning my beloved fraternity brother of Phi Beta Sigma, so keep holding it down over there, Blue Phi. Look, and speaking of the blue, there's been a lot of changes and challenges going on throughout the country. Of course, the state of Mississippi has voted to remove the Confederate flag, coming up with a new design in November to be voted on by the people, and must have in God we trust. A lot of people might not even be aware, Mike, that you served as a police officer at one point in between coaching careers and playing football. And so you see from a different perspective of a lot of the protests that's been going on with the George Floyd situation and the Black Lives Matter movement. And not we're going to get too deep, but I have to ask from your perspective, how are you seeing these things from Mike London's eyes?
Yeah, when I got cut from the Cowboys, I got the first full time job was being a police officer in the city of Richmond. I went to the academy for 6 months, and I was on the street in uniform for about 6 months, and then after that, I got promoted to the street crimes unit, and that was I did undercover stuff, and I've seen the worst of what individuals, human beings, do to each other. But I also know that even that job and as dangerous at times it was, that literally what comes out of your mouth is the opportunity to speak life or death. You can de-escalate or escalate situations. You can encourage or discourage, and officer discernment, things like that. Decisions are critical, and that's all part of being having empathy for other individuals. Now I get it. There's individuals out here that are looking to hurt people. Period. And I've noticed over the year when I was a police officer and kind of took the aspect of the standards for the team now. We'll go to class, show class, treat people with dignity and respect. That was a standard born out of being a police officer and having interactions with people. And again, I loved what I did being a police officer. At the same time, I see the issues that are going on in our country. Law enforcement, that we're responsible for protecting and serving all. You can't defend what happened to George Floyd or others that you've seen that have been caught on film. It's one of those things that we live in a country now, like where the 21st century policing has got to be at the forefront. We can send drones across to other nations, around the world. We can do things like that, but bringing that type of 21st century policing into our midst, the body cams, the transport cams in the paddy wagons or the police cars that they have, no knock warrants. The community boards need to be revived again in terms of people, having a say on officers' conduct. What is the use of force policy? What is, we have a right as individuals, as citizens of our community, to know what the local law enforcement agency's use of force policy is. Banning chokeholds, things like that. And so and having the opportunity to review officers' complaints. Because some of them you find out after the fact have had multiple complaints. But there's a whole list of things. Having been an officer, if you want to have someone to check up on, hold people accountable for, it just can't be just within the police department. It has to be outside entities as well that that can also look into and sound off on police behaviors.
Well, let me ask you this, Mike, being that you were in those shoes, do you feel like there are too many layers of protection for police officers, which could entice some, not all, to go on that rogue road?
Well, I do know this, that there needs to be layers enough that an officer's individual actions can be reviewed and looked at and assessed and evaluated, not only by the police force or police entities that are within law enforcement, but also, as that's what I said before, if we learn as citizens, or some places have those community boards, and review the processes of what an arrest looks like, review the processes of what the lethal force looks like, review the processes of when you first stop someone. What do we do? It's amazing. I've had to teach players of color about when there's a traffic stop, put both hands on the steering wheel. Don't be moving around in the car as the officer approaches. I know who you do. What's your badge number? Instead of doing all that, the goal is to arrive alive. Get the officer's badge number, comply with what he's asking you to do. Don't do any sudden movements with your hands. And so there are things that I teach. We do as kind of we have a real talk Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we talk about the different aspects of law enforcement, Title IX, how to interview, handling tough situations. Those have to be engrafted into our programs in and around the country. And I hope other coaches are doing things like that. But being able to have people outside of just the law enforcement department in the surrounding communities. So if you can educate someone in your community that you serve, that actions that go beyond this are going to raise the officer's attention. Traffic stop. If I'm walking towards a car and I see the car from the rear moving up and down, then an officer would deduce that there's movement going on in the car. Now, you might be reaching for a driver's license or your registration card, but to him, that moving in the back, looking at the back part of the car, move up and down, it could be you were also reaching for a weapon. So then that precipitates the action of unsnapping your holster. So as you approach the car with the window, hopefully the window down, we go on to making sure there's both hands on the wheel. Make sure you're complying, because there's ways that if our communities understand what officers are doing and how they're doing it, then we can call them into account of procedures and practices not being followed.
Well, and listening to you, and when you was giving those explanations, I'm like, well, I was taught that as Black Male Survival 101 when I first started driving, and I've had incidents where I was pulled over by some bad cops. I'll tell you this little story. It's kind of funny, but it was sad at the same time. Back in my hometown of St. Louis, I was traveling from dating with a young lady, and it's about 1 a.m. in the morning. Now, I grew up in, let's say, the rather challenging side of the community. And as I'm on my way home, we had to go through an area that was, let's say, called the area of street solicitors. And as I'm going through, I get pulled over, and I had $3 in my pocket, Mike. And, being a young man, $3, you're going to probably put $2 in gas and get you a pop and try to get to where you're trying to get to. So the officer pulls me over and tells me that I'm trying to solicit a prostitute. And I'm like, sir, if you can find somebody that would take me for this $3 I got, please send them my way. Well, I probably shouldn't have said that, Mike, because he then told me to get out the car, leave my car running, put me in the back of the car until my car ran out of gas.
Oh, man.
And I've had another time. Now, I'm grown and married. On my way with my wife delivering a child, officer pulls me over, sees my wife in labor, writes me a ticket. I'm like, okay. Get pulled over another time. Officers, I said, sir, is there a problem? He said, I don't know yet. Let me find out. He gives me a ticket for a crack in my windshield. A crack in my windshield. Those are just, I've had guns drawn on me, but unfortunately, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, we almost treat that as a norm. We expect that. Keeping your hands on the steering wheel, asking if you can reach to your glove compartment to show your proof of insurance. But now you don't have to do that because they have it now. They can read your license plates and see if you have insurance or not. But raising two black males, or have raised two black males, I stress that. And when they're out on a Friday and a Saturday, and you try to teach racial diversity, but the reality is there are certain things that our young males cannot do that maybe some of their white friends and even Hispanic friends can get away with. And they have to have that third eye always conscious of what's going on around them.
No, true, Mike, and that's facts you just spoke. And again, the goal is to arrive alive. So whatever was done in terms of dehumanizing you and things like that, we could we could go off, be like and get agitated, and rightfully so. But at that point where you're in a position where you're sitting in the car, you have someone standing over top of you, probably with his holster unbuttoned, or maybe have sometimes a weapon in his hand, or here's another point. Sometimes we get into that cracked windshield that you had, that summons, and then what happens as we get into this cycle of debt, because then if you don't pay the bill, then all of a sudden, or you don't get it fixed, you get pulled over again because your car now is the crack all of a sudden stretches and widens, and now it would fail inspection. Then you get into the cycle of now you got to replace the whole windshield, and then if you don't do something, then you got to find the city has, and so we do find a disproportionate amount of African Americans that are in this cycle of debt once the encounters occur, with a stop, and then continuing on of other things, of tickets and the issues that come with that. So again, telling the players at that moment, just listen, just comply and obey. Get the badge number. It has to go back to the other part of having the body cams, of having our communities know what does an appropriate traffic stop look like, what's possible, what's plausible, and what's not. So engaging in that kind of dialect with the police communities in and around where we live is critical, because the more we know, the more we can glean from what's doable, what's responsible, what's process and protocol called for, and the more we have an opportunity that they know that we know to have an outcome that perhaps might be favorable or more favorable.
With that being said, Mike, I want you to look into your crystal ball and tell me where you see policing as we once upon a time knew it to where it might be leading to within the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, obviously, the technology that we have nowadays, whether it is the body cams or satellite, satellites being able to also pick up traffic stops, encounters, in the public, encounters, infrared, there's all the sci-fi movies you think about and you're like, oh, that'll never happen. And it's like, when you think about some of the things that are going on now, that how we as a country are handling, doing some military things in terms of, like I said, we go back to drones, we go back to infrared, we go back to, body cams in the transportation trucks, or the vans that are there in the cars themselves. It just has to be a level of and then even re-policing or re-educating our officers in terms of what's going on in today's climate. I'm sure a lot of them know, but also the fact that as citizens, knowing that we know what it looks like, knowing that there's also another entity of a public review board or someone that's outside of the police agencies that can also have access to past or prior conducts, being written up or being suspended, those type of things. It's amazing how many times you'll see that the history of a bad act is not just the first incident. There are other incidences behind it. So I tell you what, I'm prayerful. You know me, faith, family, and football. I'm prayerful that there's a way that that bloodshed wouldn't be continued on. But the fact that it's happening, if it wasn't for cameras right now or phones right now capturing some of these things, just imagine how many things that have happened that haven't got brought to justice. So, but again, I'm a prayerful man, and I know that God has a plan and purpose for all of us, and I'm hoping that this is a wake up call for this country, for this not only with the pandemic that's going on, but now the social issues that are going on with George Floyd and all the others that have lost their lives needlessly. So there has to be an awakening and a reckoning and an understanding, and being more communicative of what's happening with our law enforcement agencies. It can be done. It would just have to have, like I said, people that are willing to do it, a la NASCAR, a la people that don't look like you and I, saying, you know what, we're not putting up with this. Again, SEC, you have Alabama do their deal. You have the Confederate flag, picture being taken off and so when people like that, ADs, people that hire people to make policies and help with the decisions. Because one thing that you noticed was during the protest, the peaceful protest, there were white, black, red. Yeah, there were all different color people that are out there, and that's something new and different. And I hope that continues in a peaceful manner.
Absolutely, and we might as well address the elephant in the room, Mike. That just as we need racial harmony, charity also begins at home. We've got to stop killing each other, my man. We've got to stop killing each other.
Wow. No doubt. No doubt. Change the circle of influence that are within your immediate influence. And that's with family members. That's reestablishing relationships. That's providing more clarity, being open and honest and communicating that, we are living in tough times right now. But again, just starting with ourselves and the circle of influence that we have is within our own families, the things that I'm responsible for, the people that I can perhaps influence. And so not everybody's conversation is everybody's conversation when you first start out. But the conversation that you can have initially is the one that starts with ourselves. You're right on that.
Absolutely. Black Lives Matter. Charity begins at home. And if my life really matters, then your life matters. Then I have to treat you with respect, even if we agree to disagree. And we can even go old school, Mike, go out in the backyard and go a couple of rounds. But I don't have to take your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the better man will win, but just know that if you ever want to scrap, we can scrap. But we got to get a grip on this thing from A to Z. Well, my man, you have been on point, very informative as always, transparent, and truly appreciate you getting back in the saddle with us here at the Open Mic Broadcast Network. At this time, I'm going to give you an opportunity to have some closing thoughts and comments, sir.
I would say this, Mike. I was watching ESPN and the broadcaster said made this statement. This is in regards to the monuments, the Confederacy flag, and all those things like that. He said that exposing your past doesn't condemn your present self. So just because you recognize that what's gone on and what's not right today doesn't condemn your present self, saying that's who you are now. But understanding that the pain and the suffering and the things dealing with the past injustices, it doesn't talk about yourself now. It talks about being alert and being aware. So again, I'll say once again, exposing your past doesn't condemn your present self. That's my final word, Mike.
Once again, my man, I thank you so much. It's always a joy and a pleasure. Mike London, head football coach of William and Mary. I am the radio guy, Dr. Mike Prince. Of course, our social media handles for Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter are all at The Mike Prince Show. The YouTube channel is Open Mic Broadcast Network. And our 24-hour dial-in message line, 713-570-6736. And until the next time, you guys be blessed, and we'll see you on the other side.